How do
Blacks think that we've been misled by our leadership, for instance. They think that we can consume our way into equality. Consume our way into equality. And sees equality as an equality of materials. So if I have the same car as a white person, if I have the same house as a white person, you know, a similar job, then I'm equal. But you cannot consume yourself into equality. You must produce yourself into equality, and you move into equality and beyond by productive thinking. Because as long as you're consuming knowledge or you're consuming materials, the guy who is giving it to you or selling it to you is producing at the same time, which means that you never catch up with him because he's always 2 or 3 steps ahead of you. To a good extent, many of our students go into schools, college as well as secondary levels, consuming, and their minds are not being developed to produce the true means by which they will accomplish equality. Everything else is sham.
That's fine. How should they deal in this kind of environment?
That's a pretty difficult question in the sense of the kind of control that's maintained in the environment. It sort of leads to what I might call sort of a subterfuge, where sometimes you have to produce, as the Bible verse says, give unto Caesar what Caesar's, and at the same time, though, develop your own. Meaning that the black student quite often is placed in the position of having to regurgitate to his instructors what it is they see as important, while at the same time, outside of that sphere, developing his or her own knowledge through his or her own self-instruction as such. The other facet related to that is, I don't know whether we should really depend upon the European-oriented university to provide us with our cultural education.
This is not European I'm talking about.
but many black institutions are European.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right.
Very European-oriented.
Go ahead.
As such. And the problem is, you have in many instances with the so-called many black professors is the fact that they essentially are representatives of the European point of view. And the only philosophies and orientation they too have learned have been those philosophies and orientation. I think it means that quite often then the student's job that was begun in the 60s, where we established African Studies and Black Studies program, has to be completed in the sense where these programs are not just mere electives or things you do while you have nothing else to do. They should be required, in a sense, for black students, and they should, in a sense, be the very first programs that a black student takes.
Why is why is, say, Shakespeare more important than Langston Hughes or James Baldwin? Why is that?
Because the Europeans perceive themselves as more important than non-white people, and it justifies their so-called superior position as such. It maintains and it helps to maintain the so-called unimportance of non-white people as such, and Hughes belonging to that category would not be permitted to be elevated there. It helps to maintain, of course, the power relationship as such, and to also build in values in the black student, to value what is not his as being more important, which then focuses his attentions and energies on what is European. In the sense, it helps to maintain what I call that hypnotized state as such. See, I don't see them as being valuable in the sense of teaching more, providing more knowledge, I see them as a part of the mechanism for maintaining a system of controls, and which is maintained not so much by knowledge, but by the refocusing of attention, the maintaining, and by the establishment and building in of values. It also reduces the revolutionary potential of black people, because you cannot revolt against a people whose values you share. And therefore, it makes the educated black, were he educated along Afrocentric lines and along philosophies that were very distinct and different from European philosophy, that would set him up then to actually then rebel against Eurocentric psychology and philosophy as such. But since he values that philosophy, the only thing that he can ultimately do is seek reformations to reform the systems, which is pretty much where black leadership has been set. Now, it's not a leadership that's seeking to bring about a new world order, for instance, a world order that's based on, say, different philosophies, but one that seeks merely to share the material culture of whites.
We talked a little while ago about, you mentioned Milton and Shakespeare. This touches on something that you talked about earlier, and that is the Marva Collins story out of Chicago, the black lady who did some miraculous, quote, miraculous thing, quote, miraculous thing.
In the context of this culture, yes.
Right, with some black kids, excuse me. Deal with that, if you will.
Yeah, Marva Collins has become quite a celebrity here lately, particularly as a result of her being on this so-called 60 Minutes segment, and as well as a recent drama based on her life. And I think deservedly so, in that she was able, through her own educational efforts, to elevate the intellectual functioning of black children who ordinarily would have been consigned to those categories we mentioned in the earlier show as being learning disabled and unable to read, and move them to such a level that they, as 8th grade students, were reading at high school or beyond high school level, that their scores, their level on various standardized tests were 4 and 5 grade levels beyond what they were, what they would normally be as such. And that is somewhat of a miracle in this country when you've been fed the philosophy that black children cannot learn, and that they are not interested in learning, and they have all of these deficits. It illustrates in a very practical way that a caring person, a concerned person or teacher in this instance, can change and revolutionize a child's way of thinking and dealing with the world and elevating that child's level of thinking. It has many other things about it, too, that I think are commendable. One of the things is that we, as black people, can elevate the thinking levels and change the thinking levels of our children in any way we desire if we assume control of their education. And one of the things that you find constantly, and Marva Collins is one of many situations where black children are reading now 3 and 4 grade levels, or doing math 3 or 4 grade levels beyond their current grade. That's merely one story among many. You go almost into any major urban area now, you can find black academies that are accomplishing very much the same thing in terms of scoring. The first thing you find then is, of course, that control is necessary. To have control over the learning process. I think where the integrationists misled us is in thinking that after people have told you that they don't want your children, that they think your children are inferior, that they don't think they can learn, and after we know that these people maintain their position